Hello, everybody. I'm Kay Crystal Griffith, and welcome back for another edition of Emotions, Wisdom, and Your Body. Did you know emotions are your body's wisdom? I'm so glad you're here to join us for the next 15 or 20 minutes as we delve deeper into all the effects that emotions tend to have on our body, and then the trauma they cause, and how to uncover how to get out of them, how to get those emotions released out of your body. So today I am just here as a researcher. I'm here to edify. I'm here to encourage. I'm here to educate. So I do not play a doctor. All right, here is our word for the day. Are you ready? Because I know this is one we have probably all felt at some point in our life as well. Abandonment. Abandonment. Wow, that one goes deep for a lot of people, especially with childhood trauma. So let's talk about what that actually means. So to abandon or to have abandonment is to withdraw one's support from, especially in spite of a duty or an allegiance or responsibility. There's a desertion aspect. Basically, you're abandoning someone who may be in trouble. And then there's also to give up, to leave, to cease operation, especially as a result of danger. You could also surrender one's claim to something. You abandon the claim. You could abandon beliefs, could abandon God, to cease trying to continue, to desist from. And maybe that's abandoning a search that maybe you had. And to yield oneself completely as to emotion. You're going to abandon yourself to an emotion that you're feeling in the moment. So here's some types of abandonment. There's child abandonment, abandonment of property, spousal abandonment, and you could still be married for that, marriage abandonment overall, and many, many others. People with abandonment issues tend to live in fear of loss. So if you're feeling really that extreme piece of a loss factor, we really should examine if there's abandonment issues attached to it. So does this make abandonment negative or positive? At this time, we're going to call it negative. So let's talk about how it affects your brain. Your brain develops these coping mechanisms to protect you. We've talked a lot about those different protection mechanisms, the hormones, how it affects the amygdala, fight, flight, freeze, or faint. And so your brain registers this abandonment issue, this abandonment event, this abandonment trauma as a danger. Your brain wants you to survive. So it's going to warn you anytime it's reminded of those kinds of feelings. Remember, feelings buried alive never die? So those abandonment issues that you've had forever in your life, at some given point, you had something that happened that triggered that feeling of abandonment. It's still there until it gets processed out. I remember in psych class many moons ago that there was a case study about a baby who had been left in a crib for 2 years straight. And all they do is kind of throw the bottle in there. They didn't hug her, didn't touch her, didn't hold her, nothing. And so when she was found by authorities and taken out of there, she never, ever attached. So abandonment leads to attachment issues, which is a whole nother issue. Now, abandonment, I want to speak to for a second as well, can happen in utero as well. So if the mom or even the dad did not want this child that they were now pregnant with, that baby feels that abandonment already, feels that rejection that we've already talked about, and then will begin to think that they're not even supposed to be here. And then they live their life that way. I know somebody right now walking through that kind of trauma because they wanted a boy, they wanted a girl, and he was a boy. And he has fought that issue his entire life. And so that abandonment of who he was in utero as identity, who he was, that God created him to be an amazing man of God. He doesn't know how to walk in that because he was rejected. And that's what happens with rejection. That rejection has led to abandonment. And it's pretty easy to see that direct correlation. And it develops distrust issues throughout your entire life. So you're not hurt again. That whole concept of I'm going to push you away before you push me away so I don't have to get hurt again. It develops anxiety. So you have to be watchful for that. It can also hold on strategies for hanging out with people that you shouldn't be hanging out with, just so you're not left alone. So you know that you can say you're part of a group. And even if it's a bad group that's not influencing well. So in the long run, how do we really solve some of these problems? We need to think about the fact is all of this roots in fear, right? And fear can make us do things that create more hardship for ourselves. And abandonment as an emotion, it can stay hidden actually within your body and the pituitary, the thyroid, the heart, the adrenals, and the small intestines. So as we are working together, and from a trauma coach perspective, we're going to go after that abandonment in those areas so it can get released out and processed out. So it's not always just about decharging the emotion, but we don't even want the emotion to continue living where it's been living because we want it out, right? So we can make room for what God has for you. So that abandonment can lead to separation anxiety, panic, unrealistic expectations, a fear of being alone. Events can interrupt this assurance at any age. So there are a lot of divorces happening in later in life right now. I know someone who was divorced recently at 75, lived with an alcoholic for 39 years. And for whatever reason at 75, she said, I'm done. And so this interruption can happen at any time. Okay. So neglect. Let's talk about that. Neglect is a form of abandonment. They are two separate things, but they feed into each other and can coexist. People who have been neglected, abused, or abandoned, especially during childhood, are more likely to develop abandonment issues. So adults who were neglected as a child tend to repeat those behaviors with their own children. So think about it. If you weren't taught something, how do you know how to teach it? Unless you go learn it, unless you pursue it, unless you're getting educated, unless you have a mentor. And a lot of people don't realize that they are deficient in some of those areas until somebody points them out to them. And then they're like, oh, it's not supposed to be like that. They had no idea it could be different because that's what they had been taught. That's that generational cycle as well that needs to be broken. And so that's why I just cannot impress upon you enough. Make sure you have mentors, godly, influential mentors in your life. I always encourage people to have at least 3. One who is older than you because they've been further along in the journey. One who's about your same age, but has a lot more wisdom because of the work that they've done for heart healing. And then you're mentoring someone that's coming up after you, because you still are further along than them. Even though you might not be as far as the other 2, you're still further along than the one that's coming up. And so you can pour back into them. So you always want to have at least those 3 mentors. Then I really encourage, especially, I love this. Pete Vargas just shared this with us on a wisdom challenge this past week about having a wisdom plan of mentorship. So you have mentors in marriage, in parenting, in business, and then within each of those other realms. So I have mentors in my life who I'm able to talk with about special needs and medical complexities, as well as business. And then that business breaks down into marketing, and it breaks down into tech people, and it breaks down into just the guidance of the business itself, and then entrepreneurship. You want to create not only an inner core group of people who are only 2 or 3, just like Jesus had. It really was Peter, James, and John. Those were his big 3, right? And so then he had an outer core, which included the rest of the 12 disciples. Then he had the 70. Then he had the multitudes. So if you think about that, we're just mirroring our lives after what God taught us to do as these godly mentors within our life, people you can bounce off and who know us extremely well. And then Jesus always had God as his main mentor, right? So that was his father who was directly giving him the direction that he needed to go and when he needed to do it. So if we're talking about abandonment and we don't want to be abandoned anymore, then we do need to surround ourselves with those godly, influential people. So abandonment can also cause stress. High levels of stress can make really that anxiety much, much worse. It can worsen your fears. It can create new anxieties, even phobias. It also can create more traumatic events. So not only can abandonment come from stress, neglect, and traumatic events, but it can cause more neglect, more stress, and more traumatic events. Those who've experienced injury or death or even been a victim of a crime may be more likely to develop abandonment issues because now they're just fearful of being hurt again or being a victim again. For example, death, abuse. And for those of you who are not aware, abuse comes in many forms. It is not just about hitting or strangling somebody. It is also about sexual abuse, even in a marriage, by the way, emotions, verbal abuse, spiritual abuse, and financial abuse. There's also poverty that can lead to abandonment, relationship loss, which could look like divorce. It could look like death and being a widow. It could look like infidelity. All of those lead to relationship abandonment. Now, let's just talk about some of the things that abandonment can lead to. Big time for other emotions, shame and unworthiness. Those are two huge ones. It is almost like those are the trifecta. You have abandonment, shame, and unworthiness. And when you have one, you typically have the other two. And so when we're looking for those emotions to process out, we're also looking for those as well. There's also neglect, feeling overwhelmed, afraid, exhausted. You're absolutely exhausted by having to run this life all by yourself. And then that leads to, honestly, you getting into abusive situations because you're looking for a rescuer. And you've heard me say this before, and my mentor said this to me. You know, a rescuer is going to find an oppressor. So a person who needs to be rescued, you're looking for someone to rescue you, you will find an oppressor instead. And this is not healthy, right? So when we feel like we need to be rescued into a situation, where should we be looking? Upstairs, right? He's our only rescuer. He's our only savior. He's that one that provides, protects, and empowers, right? So all those abandonment issues, they can lead to, as we said, anxiety disorders, attachment, borderline, codependency is a huge one. Because now you think in your mind, if I just take care of this other person enough, they'll love me forever. No, you're enslaving yourself. You want something more for them than they want for themselves. And they're willing to use you in the meantime. So codependency is a huge one. The list is super long, and I don't want to get into all those because I think it's super important that we realize we can break this off. So the only other thing that I want to talk to you about is people-pleasing behaviors. And those really are self-sabotaging through abandonment. And that goes along with that codependency. If I please them enough, if I don't create conflict, if I just go along with what they say, you lose yourself in the meantime. So really, that abandonment of you has led you to abandon yourself. That's a big deal. You are worthy. You have emotions. You have a mind. You are precious, and you are a masterpiece, and you have an identity that has nothing to do with anyone or anything else on this planet. You have an identity because Christ is within you. So I just want to remind you of that. So self-sabotage, never a good plan. Now, let's talk about countermeasures. How do we overcome or work through or process this abandonment piece that might be in your life right now? Or maybe you know somebody that it's fully active in, right? Remember, codependency is wanting something more for someone else than they want for themselves. So it's important that you can have a conversation with those people that you love around you, that you see these abandonment issues in, but ultimately it's up to them to want to release them, to want to disconnect from that abandonment and connect into the main power source, really. So awareness is key, right? So you can't heal or work on what you're not aware of. And that's true of any of these emotions that we need to work on. So we have to be present. We have to actively listen to our own heart, our own concerns, as well as those who are walking through abandonment issue. We have to reflect. We have to summarize our feelings verbally and authentically. We cannot mind read. Let's just be real. We cannot mind read. But when you see somebody else who's walking through abandonment issues and you kind of catch that, ooh, they're feeling a little lost, a little lonely, abandoned, right? Maybe you can begin to ask questions of them that would help them become self-aware. Understand the history. You know, childhoods, there are some horrific childhood stories that you'll hear out there. And understanding that those stories have created the person that you see in front of you typically. It's not your job to fix them, but it's certainly your job to bring grace and mercy and understanding to the situation, compassion, and be able to hear from them and understand what they're walking through, where they're going. And again, back to the asking questions piece. The best thing that we can do as a gift to someone is to listen and ask questions. Because when you ask the questions, they know that they're being heard, right? So ask the questions. So normalizing fears. We all do walk in a state of fear at some time, especially of the unknown. But the question is what you do with that fear. Who are you bringing that fear back to? And what are you doing to process the fear out? So be genuine. The deepest levels of validation is really genuineness of how you are loving other people, being authentic. And when you express your feelings, to do it in a way that you are not out to hurt yourself or to hurt someone else. Breaking off those lies for childhood abandonment, that's huge. Because oftentimes people who walk through abandonment feel like it was their fault they were abandoned. Somehow they did something to make mom leave, dad leave, them get divorced, dad beat me, mom beat me, whatever that looked like, right? And so when we're talking through abandonment, we have to be very conscientious to know that we have to first break that lie that it was their fault, because it wasn't. It wasn't. Even if they were told it was, it wasn't. They were kids, right? Your feelings of unworthiness are based on false assumptions that you made as a child, and you didn't know any better. Your emotional needs are absolutely valid, and it is normal to feel a wide range of feelings and express them in healthy ways. One of my clients found this place that we used to have in our city, and you get dressed up in head to toe with these big goggles and this jumpsuit kind of thing. And you take this sledgehammer, and they had old TVs and old furniture and plates, and you'd go in and beat the heck out of this stuff. She said that was the best therapy she'd ever had, because she could immediately get charged up and then release it. And that, remember, is what we've been holding in our central nervous system for the fight, flight, freeze, or faint, that escape plan, right? So when she'd go in and beat this stuff, it would discharge, and it would make the escape plan come out of her. So she just loved that place. She was so sad it broke down. I told her she should go open one. We'd all love to go. All right. So what's our best option, though, really, to handle these abandonment issues? And to be completely honest, it's a heart healing session. It's just getting before the Lord and having someone to guide you through that process. And it was such a joy and a delight to work with somebody recently. And that particular person shared a story online yesterday about just this vision that God gave this client in the middle of our healing session. And it was such a sweet story of just holding a hand and really just knowing that God had their hand, and God was going to walk with them and see them through, unlike their earthly father had ever done. And it just healed that heart wound of abandonment. And it was a childhood that was just pretty horrific. And in that moment, that healing that came was able to release the abandonment and to know that they had been chosen by their Abba Father. And it was just such a sweet moment to see them share that processing that they had done. So I just want to encourage you guys, there are ways to work through abandonment issues, and you learn to love yourself and for who you truly are. And you will find yourself in such a more loving and content place when you do receive that. So what are our wisdom verses? Hebrews 13:5, he himself, being God, has said, I will never desert you, and nor will I ever forsake you. He created you. He loves you. You are the apple of his eye. He will not desert you. Psalm 27:10, for my mother and my father have forsaken me. And that happens on our earth. We're human, right? But the Lord will take me up. In Romans 8:28, for we know God causes all things, not one thing is left, all things for together to work together for the good of those who love God and for those who are called according to his purpose. And guess what? Everyone is called according to his purpose. Not everyone heeds the call, but everyone is called. 2 Corinthians 4, 8-9 is our last verse. We are troubled on every side. We live in this world. It's full of chaos. And yet we are not distressed because we hold that Prince of Peace in us, right? We are perplexed, confused, but not in despair. We are persecuted, but we are not ever abandoned. We may be cast down, but we are not destroyed. So how do you use this new information on abandonment? Do not immediately go start playing therapist to your friends. Okay, I'm just going to tell you. Wisdom is the hearing, the understanding, and the application. But remember, your best gift that you could give your friends who you knew are walking through abandonment issues is to listen and ask questions. And then that's going to help them become more self-aware. So what if it's you? How do we use this? So remember our 3 questions. How has abandonment been showing up in your life? Have you been abandoning yourself? Self-sabotage is pretty key for that. How has it been positive or negative? It's going to be not so positive. And how can you transform abandonment by wisdom, understanding, and knowledge as you walk in it forward? So remember, take our scriptures, put your name in it. So I want to do that one on purpose. So let's do 2 Corinthians. I'm going to use my name, but I want you to insert yours. So Crystal may be troubled on every side, but she is not distressed. Crystal may be perplexed, but she is not in despair. Crystal may be persecuted, but she is not abandoned. Crystal may be cast down, but she is not destroyed. He wrote these verses just for you. They are all your promises, so please add your name. And don't worry, I'll post this in our chat. I'd love to hear how abandonment may have shown up in your life and you didn't realize it. You didn't realize that's what your self-sabotage tendencies were really stemming from. Fear of loss. So tomorrow's word is loneliness, which is often what people feel when they feel abandoned. So let's talk about it. Let's see how we can get it out of there. Join us again tomorrow for more emotions, wisdom in your body, and register at kcrystalgriffith.com to receive more insights and your feeling wheel. You guys have a fantastically blessed day. Take care.